we knew of the possible dangers. I heard the initial impact of the first, huge stones, and we had to move out of our home. Close up, move out.
We were thrown into a cell. I was frightened, but I didn't want to show it. But then the people were grabbing at us through the bars, the windows, and we had never seen anything like that before.
We were spat upon, we were pushed, we were shoved, smoke blown over us, sitting at the counters, and during the picket lines, pushed out of line, people coming by saying terrible things.
They mocked us, you know. They threw tear gas on purpose in my sister's face, and I was kicked twice by the police in my stomach.
It was racist. Tallahassee was racist.
The civil rights movement in Tallahassee was a local struggle for black equality, but it was also part of the larger battle for racial justice throughout the South.
It was a very courageous stance for people who knew that, for me, I think they could feel that a change was coming, that this thing was bigger than themselves.
This is the beginning. This is not the end. Because from the very beginning, whites knew this is more than just about where a black person is going to sit on a bus. This is about changing race relations. This is about what is going to become a struggle for black rights and equality.
There was no question about turning back or whether we should do this or not do the other. It was just head forward toward freedom.
Welcome to Footsteps to Freedom. I'm Tina Dunbar. Did you know that Tallahassee played an important role in the civil rights movement? I'm standing off the corner where McCory's department store was once located. It was the scene of a lunch counter demonstration in the 1960s, and it sparked many other demonstrations throughout our community. In fact, this very sidewalk holds the legacy for the heroic foot soldiers of the civil rights movement living right here in our community. Theirs is a story of sacrifice, struggle, and perseverance. It is our hope that you will watch, learn, and share their story. For this is our history, one that is deeply woven in the fabric of our community.
I think this project is the exact kind of project that Tallahassee should be doing more of. We should begin to start looking at our authentic history, getting with the people who actually know the stories. If we don't get these stories in time, we will no longer have anybody around who can authenticate the history.
It began with a lot of planning, and the city came to us with an idea, and we made it a reality. This has got to be one of the largest scope projects we've ever encountered in my time here. I think we were able to really perform and do something that is going to be long-lasting for Tallahassee and important to our culture and history here.
The footprints with all the different names is what was most impressive to me. And when I went and looked, I said, you know, there are some people in Tallahassee who are going to be so thrilled that the work of their parents, their grandparents, their ancestors has not been forgotten. And that finally all of those days of fear and marching and protesting so that life could be better for all of us will finally be recognized in a very prominent way.
Many people believed in the 1950s, before the civil rights movement began all over the South, and even continue to believe today, that Florida was not a typical Deep South state, that somehow its race relations were better, things were different here, but events prove that to be untrue.
Tallahassee was like a typical small southern town, 27,000 people when we came in '52. But it was racist. Tallahassee was racist.
For us, it was a normal environment. Many times we had to go downtown. There were 9 of us. If any of us had to go to the restroom, if we were at McCrory's watching a parade, she had to figure out a way to duck across the street so we could go to this bathroom in the bottom of the courthouse, which I later found out was the black bathroom.
If I go in a store and it's a water fountain there, why do I have to go to the ones they colored? She said, 'cause you're black. I said, I just want to get this thing straight. I went to the white one, and a white man came in there, and he said, well, what you doing over there drinking water? I said, 'cause I want to find out the difference in this water. I said, I thought y'all had some sweet water over here, and we didn't have no sweet water. They said, child, you could have been dead. I said, why I was going to be dead? I wasn't bothering anybody. I said, I just was drinking the water. She said, that's one of the reasons you'd have got killed.
Tallahassee was very much a Deep South community. 30% or closer to a third of the population was black. But the community was controlled by a tightly knit group of white businessmen, white politicians, and there was very little opportunity for blacks to step out of this rigidly segregated community. It was really a dual society. It was really a system of apartheid. Every aspect of society was segregated. Well, in May 1956, this all changed when 2 black women students from Florida A&M University refused to give up their seat next to a white woman and moved to the rear of the bus. Wilhelmina Jakes and Carrie Patterson were both students at Florida A&M. They lived off campus, and they'd gotten on the bus to go downtown to get to Patterns to make dresses for a dance that was upcoming at the university. And they sat in one of the front row seats next to a white rider, and when they refused to move, they were arrested and taken to jail.
They told her if she didn't move to the back of the bus, her and Carrie Patterson, that the bus driver would just pull to the side of the street next to a payphone. Imagine that today. And go call the police. And my aunt said the policeman came aboard and said, you girls want a ride? I'll give you a ride.
Interestingly, the young women were charged with inciting a riot. They were not charged with violating the city's bus segregation ordinance.
Well, they were eventually released, and 2 of them a cross was burned in front of their apartment. When my aunt spoke about it, she said they looked out the window and they said, "There's something burning out there. It's a cross." And I can only imagine the fear they must have felt if someone would come into your boundary, your space, on the property where you're living, in the heart of what was then the African American community, and take a cross out and plant it in the yard and light it, were people who were very dangerous.
On Monday, 2 days after the young women were arrested, students at Florida A&M rallied together and decided that they would boycott the buses coming onto the campus. And so when buses were coming through the campus, they would stop and ask people to get off. So that's how the bus boycott began. It was a student-initiated boycott and the first activist protest in the civil rights movement in Tallahassee.
These students, they were willing to risk their safety. Some of them didn't even understand the danger that they were in. Many of them were involved in the movement without their parents' knowledge. Parents thought that their kids were here in class, and they were on the picket lines. It was a very courageous stance for the people who knew that, for me, I think they could feel that a change was coming, that this thing was bigger than themselves.
It was a lovely day, lovely spring day in May. I was on my way home from FAMU High School, and usually we would walk, but I remember Clifford, my younger brother, and I were together. We got the bus that day, and the crowds were in the street. We had heard nothing about a boycott or anything at that point. But immediately we knew what had happened when the students were yelling, "Get off that bus." There were other people on the bus at that time. And when we got home, we learned for sure that a boycott had been called. And that's how it began.
Some buses had a line drawn about a quarter of the way down to the back of the bus. Sometimes it was across the ceiling, sometimes it was across the floor. And the blacks were supposed to always go beyond that line. The bus driver, if there were black people in seats up closer to the front, he would tell them they got to get up and move to the back and let this white person, might be a kid, 10 years old, and let this kid sit down. And they were very humiliated, it really was.
And what was the most upsetting to blacks is when they boarded the bus in the predominantly black routes, they would often have to stand even though there was only one white person sitting in the 3-person seat or the 2-person seat at the front of the bus. There was a mass meeting and the black community voted to support the bus boycott. And one important thing that came out of that meeting was that they created a new organization, the Inter-Civic Council, the ICC, to lead the boycott. It was mainly comprised of black ministers and local black businessmen who were not dependent on the city or state government for their employment. And C.K. Steele quickly became the leader of the boycott, and he was recognized as the leader of the boycott in the black and in the white community.
Reverend Steele was a man who fought for the poor people. He fought for all the rights that we needed to have.
I am the second son of Reverend and Mrs. C.K. Steele Sr. There were 6 of us. Life was, I suppose, rather typical of an African-American pastor's family in the South. And of course, after the bus boycott started, life changed altogether. We lived in some fear, but determined. We were determined, and you might say courageous. My dad was very courageous. Nobody had any doubts or uncertainties about whether we should be involved in this or my dad should be involved in it.
From the very beginning, whites thought that the NAACP was the backbone behind the ICC and the bus boycott. And although the NAACP did make one of the first contributions to the boycott, it was the Intercivic Council, which was an independent group, that led the boycott. One of the most important things that the black community did in that first mass meeting at Bethel Baptist Church was to form a carpool so that when blacks boycotted the buses, they would have a way to get to work. The boycott very quickly got the attention of whites because blacks were 80% of bus patrons. So if you have a bus boycott that is supported by the vast majority of the black community, the bus company is going to start to feel some economic pain when nobody is riding the bus. Less than 2 months after the bus boycott started, the bus company had to shut down the transportation system because the revenue had dropped so much they could not afford to keep the buses running. So when this happened, there was a real increase in intimidation toward blacks in the community, not just the drivers in the bus boycott, but to the leaders of the bus boycott.
We had to move out of our home. I mean, close up, move out. We were right there on the corner of Tennessee and Boulevard. At that time, it's Martin Luther King Boulevard now. We had to move out of the house because of attacks, late night attacks. The first one was loud hecklers coming by in cars, stopping and throwing bricks and stones through all the windows across the front of the house. I heard the initial impact of the first, huge stones and rocks coming through the house. First sound, I was up out of the bed and under the bed before I knew it. And then my mother was quickly gathering everybody together and getting us in the center of the house. My dad remained up front in his bedroom and actually looking out at the guys throwing the bricks. And the cross burning had that happen. And also gunshots. You know, this wasn't just one incident. And it continued, so we felt it wasn't safe. Well, it wasn't safe for us to be there.
In the fall of 1956, the Ku Klux Klan came to Tallahassee, and in full hooded menace, they paraded past Steele's parsonage. And blacks, instead of cowering in their home, had a huge prayer meeting and continued to support their leaders and continued to support the bus boycott. Many blacks who supported the bus boycott, cars were shot, insurance policies were canceled, people were threatened at work, but still the bus boycott continued.
When I think about that time in the late 50s when my aunt, along with Carrie Patterson, decided that they would go to jail rather than move to the back of the bus. Those days were not days to be taken lightly, because that was taking your life in your hands. And that was risking your life. And I'll never forget my mother telling me years later, she said, well, my mother got a call from someone saying, we're going to kill you. And that's something we never dream of. Someone calling our phone and saying, we're going to kill you, okay? Or we're going to kill her.
And you have to remember that while all this is going on in Tallahassee, the Montgomery bus boycott is still going on in Montgomery, Alabama. But when the Tallahassee bus boycott started in May 1956, the Montgomery bus boycott was only 5 months old. And there was absolutely no indication that the Montgomery bus boycott would succeed. Well, the city commission and other powerful whites were so intent on maintaining segregation on the buses that even after the federal court ruled that Montgomery's bus segregation laws were unconstitutional. This was in June of 1956. The City Commission refused to say that that applied to Tallahassee. And so the bus boycott continued. Finally, the United States Supreme Court ruled that Montgomery, Alabama's bus segregation laws were unconstitutional, and that all of Alabama's bus segregation laws were unconstitutional. C.K. Steele and a team of ministers got together and they boarded the buses and they sat toward the front of the bus and they rode around town. A couple of the ministers were asked to move and they didn't, and nothing happened. Well, the next day, the city arrested the head of the City Transit Bus Company for not enforcing the bus segregation ordinance. So you see that blacks had caused this division, had driven this wedge in the white community between the city government that was more intent on maintaining segregation at any cost, and between the bus company who was more concerned with not going out of business. So the ICC, the black community, decided, well, we're going to have a big ride. We're going to ask all blacks to come out and ride the bus. Well, when they got to the designated bus stops, large crowds, over 200 people of whites came out with bats, with bricks, with everything to try to keep the blacks from boarding the bus. So C.K. Steele called off that mass riding the buses and said, we're just going to continue on individual basis to ride the bus.
There was a crowd of people there. There was a good 35 or 40 people there at the bus stop. I said, we have a good crowd, saying this to myself. But nobody got on the bus except me. When I got on the bus, I sat behind the driver, and the driver said, you're going to have to move to the back of the bus. I didn't argue with him, but I didn't say anything at all. In a few minutes, a photographer came up and snapped a picture. I didn't think that was so unusual. So the bus driver, I guess he was puzzled, very puzzled. So rather than him driving on off, he decided to reach up and turn the engine off. And we just sat there for about, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know exactly how long. What was going on, I did not know, because Reverend Steele and his other assistants had gotten death threats. If they would do that the next morning, that same morning, there'd be some lives killed. And they called it off. I did not get the word that they had called it off. So I'm the one that went and got on the bus.
The violence against the bus boycotters became so intense that Governor Leroy Collins temporarily suspended bus service in January 1957. The buses had resumed operation in the summer of 1956 with reduced routes and fares to encourage whites to come back to the bus.
Tallahassee still didn't have the kind of violence that other places such as Birmingham, Montgomery, Little Rock had. We had plenty.
After the United States Supreme Court in December had said that Alabama's bus segregation laws were illegal, the city rescinded the original segregation ordinance and decided to enact a new ordinance that would require that the bus drivers would seat bus patrons where they wanted. So if you got on the bus, you bought your ticket and you were told to sit in seat 6 or seat 4. And they said it was because of the health and safety of the patrons, but really everybody knew it was just to try and maintain segregation. So by the spring of 1957, the whole city was just weary of this year-long bus boycott and what it had cost the city. And so without officially striking down their latest ordinance, they just quit enforcing that. And so blacks came back to the buses and rode in an integrated fashion. The boycotters, the ICC, could point to a victory because they had achieved their demands. Segregation was no longer tolerated on the buses. black bus drivers had been hired, and more importantly, the boycotters had forced powerful and important whites to make concessions to their demands. So this was one battle that was won, but for the black community, it gave people hope and encouragement. And to the white community, it showed this is the beginning, this is not the end. Because from the very beginning, whites knew this is more than just about where a black person is going to sit on a bus. This is more than just if someone can sit in the front row and doesn't have to stand in the back or give up their seat to a white person. This is about changing race relations. This is about what is going to become a struggle for black rights and equality.
It was the second successful boycott of any in the country. In fact, it said, I heard my dad say Tallahassee was more successful in its boycott than Montgomery was.
Just like Rosa Parks, she just got tired of doing what she had been doing, and that gave other people a little encouragement. Just let them know that you put your money in, you expect to ride the bus like everybody else and get the same accommodation.
Blacks had used the bus boycott to begin to plant the seeds for a more multifaceted civil rights movement that eventually would change race relations in this community.
Well, the city of Tallahassee and Leon County, along with many citizens, recognized the need to memorialize the civil rights movement in Tallahassee. The site at the corner of Monroe Street and Jefferson Street offered that opportunity because that's where the McCrory's Dime Store was. And McCrory's Dime Store was the site of protests against the segregated seating policy of the time. And making the sidewalk itself the memorial gave us an opportunity to let people walk where history was made, and to do this entirely within the public realm where the demonstrations actually happened. Well, I just drew it and drew it and drew it. I love to draw, so I just did a lot of sketches. We presented the idea, the concept, to the City Commission, and the City Commission was enthusiastic about it, and we began work with FSU Master Craftsman Studio.
Master Craftsman Studio is a production studio. We make a lot of different objects for the university. The way the project started is the city gave us the initial design, and then we sort of massaged the design. This is a computer-generated plan that gives us a picture of what the final project will look like once it's installed downtown Tallahassee. And on each of these brass footprints are men and women's names who were prominent in the local civil rights movement.
This isn't something we've done before, so we did a lot of research. This is the 2D layout for water jet cutting. This is the vector files for the lines that the machine will be following with the letters, the phrases included. So the way we cut the brass is put the sheet into the machine, and we zero the machine to the corner of the brass. From there, it will read the OMAX program, and it will follow the lines that we have designated for it. The machine engages once I push play, and with the high pressure water and the garnet abrasive, it's able to cut through the brass sheet almost like butter. So we use that program and cut our pattern for each of the feet, and perfect letters. Then we'll be mixing up some aggregate and cement and putting it in the bucket here, add some water, some pigment, and we'll put it in the casting box for casting all the different sections. just begin by putting some into the box and building up about a 3/8 inch layer. We will have backed this with 3 inches of concrete and put rebar and reinforcing lath through it. Once this is cured, then we can take it outside and flip the entire works over to expose the face of the concrete. We begin polishing. We've got what is called a termite, and it is an 8-disc oscillating polisher. And with a little bit of water, they will glide right over the surface and flatten out the stone for us and reveal that aggregate. And then we grout. And grout just fills in all the little holes, air bubbles we might have had while casting. And then after grout, we seal it, which gives it the ultimate shine at the end and the protection and slip guard that's needed for a sidewalk. So it's taken just about 4 months by the time we're done. The city came to us with an idea, and we made it a reality. And I think we've come up with something pretty spectacular.
When I first saw the finished product going into place, that was one of the most exciting events of my life, honestly. To see those panels being placed into the sidewalks so carefully and so beautifully by the Public Works Department. It was a beautiful August day, it was very hot, but that was just magic. It's the kind of thing that an architect lives for. I'm very proud of the sidewalk, and every time I drive by it or walk by, I'm delighted to see somebody pointing at it, or taking a picture, or just pausing to read. That's the best part. That's the part which will last.
The civil rights movement was not just one protest that led to one demonstration that led to another demonstration to another protest. It was not this linear movement that you can just chart out. After the bus boycott ended in 1957, there was no large demonstration or civil rights activity until 1960. But in 1959, things really changed when Patricia and Priscilla Stephens attended a CORE meeting in Miami, Florida. CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, was an interracial civil rights organization. There they saw how direct action protest could take place and what the results could be.
By accident, we went to this workshop, and we were so moved that we decided that we would come back to Tallahassee and organize a CORE chapter. We had no idea what we were doing, trust me, but we just thought we could do it. My father told us, he said, anybody can do wrong, but it takes a good person to do right. He said, you don't need to do wrong. You look at other people and see what they're doing. You don't need to do the same thing. You do right. And that has stayed with us all our lives.
I think my involvement came from two things. One is my father's idea that if you stand up for something that's right, stand up and don't give ground. But from my mother, it was more important. It was like fairness for all people.
So when Patricia and Priscilla came back to FAMU in the fall of 1959 and started the first CORE chapter, it was a very significant moment for the Tallahassee civil rights movement.
The strategy of CORE was to test. Although we knew Tallahassee was segregated, but you just could not assume. You had to actually test it out.
In February of 1960, Pat Stephens and her sister Priscilla and other FAMU students went downtown Tallahassee and sat in at the Woolworth lunch counter.
We had already made our plans, what we were going to do. We were going to go in, sit to the counter, order what we wanted, and not leave when asked to.
And they said, you must leave. And I said to them, we would not leave until we were served.
We decided that we were going to jail, if necessary.
They were immediately arrested and taken to jail.
That first experience was a first one of having gotten arrested for just trying to get a little lunch. It was a matter of displaying some courage, demanding to be served, being unafraid of what might have happened to us.
It was an exhilarating experience. They had actually done an overt action against segregation. I mean, walking into a Woolworth's or a McCrory's and sitting down at a lunch counter and demanding service was very important. This wasn't a publicly owned facility. This was a private owned company. To go in and sit down at a seat and say, I want you to serve me and I'm going to stay here until I'm served. This is something far different than a boycott where people just withdraw their service. This is actively coming in, sitting down, and demanding service. So the demonstrations continued. The FAMU students organized another lunch counter demonstration.
And we built up a group of people too, because when students heard about what we were doing, we may have started out with 8 people. Then we could get like 10 or maybe 15.
Students that went to McCrory's to sit in and students that went to Woolworth's to sit in were arrested. So Pat Stephens organized 1,000 students or more to go back into town and demand that the students be released from jail. Well, meanwhile, the city commission ordered the police to stop the demonstrators from coming into town. Whites were swarming in the middle of all this with tear gas flowing, hitting blacks, knocking down blacks.
We were spat upon, we were pushed, we were shoved, smoke blown over us, sitting at the counters and doing the picket lines, pushed out of line, people coming by saying terrible things.
Persons who were standing by, who harassed us. There was a struggle at this particular occasion. Got my eyeglasses broken.
They mocked us, you know. They threw tear gas on purpose in my sister's face.
And it burned Pat's eyes so badly that for the rest of her life, she had to wear dark glasses.
And I was kicked twice by the police in my stomach.
Students were arrested and taken to jail, both black and white students.
My brother's name was William H. Larkins, and he was a student at Florida A&M University. He decided, I'm not going to just go and buy something at a separate register and go out and eat it. I want to sit there with them. We're paying the same money, so I want to sit down and I want to eat at the lunch counter, and that's what he did. He spent 49 days in jail, and he refused bail because he felt that, you know, he was going to stay there until something happened.
The sit-ins really took the city of Tallahassee and Tallahasseans by surprise because it was the first time that blacks in the community had used this new concept of nonviolent direct action protest.
My father, as well as many others, would not have been involved if there had not been the importance of nonviolence.
In fact, 2 of C.K. Steele's sons were arrested at one of the lunch counter demonstrations.
I was the first high school teenager to go to jail. My brother and I were the first high school teenagers to be arrested. And to tell you the truth, it was a memorable experience, not because of how bad it was, but I was young and I knew it was right, I knew it was important. I didn't know exactly where it was going, but I had the feeling that it was going in the right direction and that we would be triumphant. So at 16, I worked on the chain gang out of Leon County Jail.
This was an epic battle to change society, and there were huge ramifications. Students could be suspended from school, and some were. Students could lose their scholarships, and some did. People went to jail. They stayed in jail. They had to pay fines. So for many Florida A&M students who were the first generation in their family to go to college, they were threatened with losing all of that, all their parents had worked for. But these students were different. They had been raised at a time when aspirations for blacks were increasing. They had been taught in school, these are the tenets that our country was based on: equality of man, the rights of all people, and if you work hard in this country, you can get what you want. And they can't go in a lunch counter and sit down at the counter and order a hamburger. They're supposed to go to the back of the store with the black takeout. Well, of course, this was intolerable. But Tallahassee really was put on the map, so to speak, when the students were convicted and sentenced to jail. What happened next was the first time this had ever happened anywhere in the South. Of the 11 demonstrators that were arrested that day, 8 of them decided that they would go to jail rather than pay their fine against what they thought was an unjust law.
Paying bail, we felt, would be paying for segregation or paying to help the others, so we just stayed.
This was amazing news, not just in Tallahassee, but in the South. These students are going to stay in jail. They're going to go to a jail in the Deep South, and who knows what's going to happen.
We were thrown into a cell that had 4 bunk beds, top and bottom, but the door to the cell could not be locked. And the inmates frightened us. You know, we had never been around people who had committed crimes, and we knew it. And so we slept together. I was frightened, but I didn't want to show it because I was a spokesman for the group, and so I internalized.
The conditions weren't good at all. They were bad, but we were going to endure. I slept on the floor in jail on a pad, and I caught a death of cold before I got out and got pretty sick.
2 of us slept together. One night, one person slept with the back on the wall, and the other person slept hanging over the bed, and you had to hold on, so you could never have a deep sleep. In 49 days, we never slept deeply.
CORE, of course, became involved in the students' case. They spread this all over the country. And so a lot of notoriety came to Tallahassee because of that, but more importantly, people all over the country in the North and in other parts of the South saw and heard from these students what was happening in the capital of the state of Florida. The fact that this movement held together, this sit-in movement and these demonstrations held together, is really remarkable. That it did not happen all over Florida. It did not happen all over the South. There might be 1 demonstration or 2 demonstrations, and then as soon as someone was suspended from school or someone served out a jail sentence, you know, it's so understandable to see why people would not risk this. So they continued on with demonstrations and protests, but the city had made a decision that they would not arrest any more students because they didn't want to bring so much notoriety to the demonstrations. So what was the result of all this? Well, once again, the business community was more upset about what was going on than the City Commission. The City Commission, the leaders of the community wanted to maintain segregation, but the businesses were losing money. So what ultimately happened in this community was that representatives from CORE and a few whites from the community, particularly white ministers, got together and went to the managers of Woolworths and McCrory's, and the managers said, we want this to end. We're losing business, and we don't want there to be this violence like we have seen in Albany and some other places across the South. You know, what can we do? So they worked out an agreement to end segregation at those lunch counters, and only those lunch counters. So by the middle of 1963, the lunch counter demonstrations, 3 years after those demonstrations started, the national chain lunch counters were integrated. But there was still segregation at locally owned stores. There was still segregation all over the community. It was going to take intervention by the federal government, most specifically in a federal law that would outlaw segregation in public and private facilities.
I know you look like you were there with us.
Good evening to all of you, and it's my pleasure to be here with you this evening as we celebrate an unveiling of the Leon County Civil Rights Heritage Sidewalk. Tonight we are honoring a special group of individuals referred to as foot soldiers. They are true heroes. They took extraordinary risks because of a belief that all people should be treated fairly. The City of Tallahassee-Leon County and the Tallahassee Community Redevelopment Agency have partnered to create something which all of us will soon see and will recognize and experience as a beautiful landmark for downtown Tallahassee.
Ooh, there's our grandmother. That's my grandmother right there. Wow. Willie K. Perkins. That's my grandmother. My great-grandmother. And her great-great-grandmother.
I couldn't help but think on my short walk this evening from the courthouse to City Hall how the Heritage Walk will serve as a reminder and serve as a source of inspiration to so many young people, so many generations of young people who, like young people do, may be dreaming about the impact that they'll make on the world and the impact that they could make on their community. But isn't it great that they will have footsteps to follow right downtown here in our community? Footsteps figuratively and footsteps literally.
See, we went in that side door, and around the side door was a counter where we had to stand. We had to stand up there and eat at that counter. Yeah, you went in that door, and then the seated area was on the other side. But that's where you went and stood there.
Not all warriors fought on foreign soil. Today, we are here to recognize, remember, and appreciate 58 individuals who fought for a noble cause here at home, a fight against oppression, inequality, and injustice. Each footstep, each name, each life in the monument that we will soon unveil epitomize human struggle and triumph. Today is a remembrance of 58 individuals who lived, led, and left a legacy. This is the occasion.
In second grade, I first learned about the civil rights movement, and the assignment from my teacher that day was to go home and ask the oldest person in your family what it meant to them. I went home and I asked my great-grandmother, I said, Grandma, because that's what we called her. I said, what was the civil rights fight all about? And she could have taken hours to tell me, but she chose to use a sentence that I want to use here today. She said, boy, that's how she started, don't you ever take anything from a man that is less than what you deserve. And as a matter of fact, if that man tries to give you less than you deserve, you go and you take what you deserve. That's what the Civil Rights Movement was about.
Okay, look at this. This is Bill.
Brother Bill.
Brother Bill William.
Uncle
yeah.
Bill.
Yeah, Brother Bill, Uncle Bill.
Yep.
Amazing. This is amazing. Yeah, yeah.
It was no way I was going to stay home and not see my Uncle Bill and my Aunt Mina footprints that represent not only themselves and the 53 others, but celebrates the Civil Rights Movement and embodies us, and it should make us stronger to continue to fight.
Yeah.
Now, we all know that each of their experiences, their stories, is a sobering reminder of a darker time in our nation's history. And yet, some chose to fight back. Not through violence, but through peaceful protests. They would not be moved from their seats on the bus, nor would they relinquish their seat at the Woolworth lunch counter. These are just some of the seemingly small but immeasurable important actions that help pave the way for me, for Nick, and for a whole bunch of people in this room. And it paved the way for a brighter future.
Most of the folks whose names are on the footprints were very, very active.
Okay.
All right.
They used to sit in at the counters with you guys and everything?
Yes, for the most part. And here is the name. Here.
That's incredible there. Oh, yeah.
It feels like real gold.
And this is something that you can share with the grandkids, your great-great-grand. Honey, I am so proud of you.
It's very, very touching. It's humbling, to say the least. It's going to be there.
Wow, Dad. Thank you, honey.
It is so tremendously important when you have a sense of self-realization, right? Like why it is you sit, why you stand, why you're here, why you're present, that there are no accidents, that there are no mistakes, that the steps of a good man or woman are ordered. And I think like many of us here, I feel overwhelmingly, indescribably blessed to be in this room, to be in this moment, to be each and every one of you.
Isn't this sidewalk a great statement for who we are?
Absolutely it is. This is what a capital city really looks like. This is the kind of commemoration that you go to the capital city of a state to see. And I'm just very proud of our community for this sidewalk.
I just think about the young people who didn't live through the Civil Rights Movement, can see the blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice that other people went through to make sure that we have freedom in America. So I'm glad that young people everywhere will be able to see this here in the capital city.
Indeed.
Forever.
I believe that you come to know a city, especially the one you call home, by its details. And I'm proud to live in a city that knows, among all the big plans, that a tiny gesture in a sidewalk can speak enormously to the heart of who we are.
Yeah, this is me.
This is you right here?
Yeah, that's Priscilla Stephens.
You see, I got a picture of her.
And her sister, she's at the left. Where's my sister? There's my sister right here. There she is.
That's your sister right there.
That's
So
right.
when you look at this picture, what is it? What do you think of?
Well, you know what? It's just, we believed in a cause and we fought it. And we still have to fight. As I said, the struggle hasn't continued, so we are still fighting and fighting and fighting.
Everybody, every African American who struggled in that time, every Caucasian person who struggled, who marched, who worked, are foot soldiers. In one way or the other, there are those who were actually out there with their feet on the ground. We were tired. We were tired. We were tired. And things just had to happen. Inevitably, it was going to happen. But thank God for foot soldiers.
May I ask all of the foot soldiers and or their representatives to kindly stand now and receive the applause from the audience.
We had a knowledge that we would win the struggle and that the struggle would be won. And there was never any doubt that our involvement would not succeed.
Tallahassee has not really realized the important place they played in the civil rights movement.
This particular project will be here for future generations yet to come. When I am no longer around, you are no longer around, our children will not have to dig so much to uncover history.
If there had not been civil rights movements in Tallahassee, throughout Florida, and throughout the South, the Civil Rights Acts would never have passed, or they would have passed many years later. So the courage and conviction of those early black demonstrators, whether in bus boycotts or lunch counter demonstrations, theater demonstrations, those first black plaintiffs who filed in court to desegregate the public schools, all those brave people who fought for years for their basic constitutional rights, we have them to thank for those acts of legislation that finally began to ensure blacks that they would enjoy the benefits of American citizenship and protection of the Constitution. Finally, the government became an ally to blacks and not an enemy.
Amazing grace.
If I could say one thing about how we could commemorate and recognize and honor the foot soldiers, I would say as Americans, we need to learn to love each other more, to take care of each other more, to help each other more, to understand each other more, to come together more. That at least was part of what they wanted.
Forgive everybody, love everybody, no matter what. And it works out better than when you hold grudges and hate. You know, people have done a lot of evil things to me, to us. But you don't go around hating anybody. You can't carry that burden around.
I wish that people would begin to see and treat each other as best they can treat them, no matter whether black, white, or Hispanic, or whatever, because people are people. Anybody that live and breathe, they bleed when they're injured. They have the same feelings as anyone else, and people need to know that.
Marching on the freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody
I just keep on, because I'm marching on the freedom land. I can't let segregation turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let segregation turn me around. I just keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on the freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody, can't let them turn me around, Lord, turn me around.